Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kep, editor-in-chief and co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. Welcome to our webinar today. It's about the HR metrics that matter, defining ROI in a people-first culture. Before we get started, for today's attendees, that's you, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for one of our virtual conferences. It's on July 16th, and it is about navigating the new landscape of employee benefit solutions. What was once a fairly standard set of offerings has blossomed into myriad point solutions, many of them beneficial to workers, yet creating a daunting task for benefits leaders to evaluate and to adopt them. What new approaches are benefits leaders taking to designing comprehensive benefits packages? How are benefits experts measuring employee expectations, quality of outcomes, and return on investments? We'll find out. I'm putting a link in the chat space right now. It's accessing complimentary VIP tickets for you for that virtual conference, including access to the whole day's activities. I hope we'll see you there. Now, today's session is about the HR metrics that matter, defining ROI in a people-first culture. In a world where every dollar counts and every initiative needs proof, HR leaders face rising pressure to show the real impact of investing in the well-being of their people. But you don't need to be a data scientist to demonstrate the value of your work. This session is designed to help lean HR teams measure what matters and to tell a story that resonates with leadership. Today's webinar is being presented with support from HiBob, and I'll tell you a bit about them. Bob is a modern HR platform that enables mid-sized businesses to create remarkable work experiences. As the world of work continues to evolve, Bob adapts to business needs using unparalleled configurability that can handle everything from remote and hybrid work to global expansions and non-traditional organizational structures. Now, a few quick logistical items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on demand soon after the event. You can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. The same email will have you give you information about how you can get credits for this session from SHRM and HRCI. You can look out for a written account of the conversation on our website at fromdayone.co. In about 45 minutes into the session, we'll have a Q&A conversation. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Moderating today's discussion will be Emily McCrary Ruiz Esparza, a From Day One contributing editor who writes about business and the world of work. Her stories have appeared in The Economist, the BBC, the Washington Post, and Business Insider, among many others. And she recently won a Virginia Press Association Award for Business and Financial Journalism. So Emily, welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here. Also happy to be reunited with both Ken and Lane. We've had the pleasure of doing webinars like this before. They're both very qualified and really good at talking about what they do in real terms. So I'm excited to be here with you both. Before we do intros, there's a poll we want to put up quickly. So audience members, if you could direct your attention there, and we'll go ahead and get rolling. So let's do intros before I start asking both of you questions. Ken, let's start with you. Who are you? What do you do at HiBob? What should our audience know about you?
Hi, Emily. So everybody, I'm Ken Matos. I'm the Director of Market Intelligence at HiBob. So my background is as an organizational psychologist. I've spent the last almost 20 years working in nonprofits, government, and for-profit organizations, studying what makes work work for people, as well as businesses. At HiBob, I help us really understand what's going on in the market, what does HR need in terms of technology to help them be successful, and I help educate our communities and our programmers on what that is.
Thanks, Ken. Lane.
I don't know how to follow that up, but my name is Lane McFarland. I am the Vice President of Talent Management at Flashpoint. Flashpoint's a global threat data and intelligence company. We have 350 team members in over 8 countries with 100 analysts that speak over 35 languages, and we're an HR team of 6. So over the last 2 years, our team's been very focused on our data decision making, our data analytics, and providing ROI clearly to every elevation of the organization.
Lane, how many languages do you speak?
1.
Okay. But you're good at finding people who are multilingual. That's excellent. Okay. All right. So the title of today's webinar is The HR Metrics That Matter, Defining ROI and a People-First Culture. Now, That's a term I've heard many, many times before. People first culture. People attending today will have heard that many times. Ken, I want to start with you. What do you mean when you talk about a people first culture, and how does that relate to something like well-being? Because I think that's where a lot of people's minds will go.
Yeah. So when I'm thinking about a people first culture, I like to sort of separate the sort of societal ethical conversation and the business strategy conversation. And so when we're talking societal people, like people first generally means people are more important than profits. I think it's something that when we're talking about how we want our overarching culture as a society and a country to be, we all want to agree with. But if that was enough to sell business leaders on it, we wouldn't be having this webinar. When I'm talking about people first in a business context, I'm talking about the belief that your competitive advantage is your people, and therefore you need to sustain that competitive advantage and people. So in today's world, we're talking about AI all the time and how like that's going to supplant people, except it's gonna be available to everybody. And so it's not really going to be a competitive advantage for very long. It's the unpredictable, varied creativity of humans that actually allows one business to leapfrog over another. And so when you're people first, you're really looking for ways to get the right people to advance your business strategy most effectively.
So it's matching people to jobs and to company as well.
Absolutely. And making sure that from a well-being perspective, you're sustaining those people for the long haul and making sure you've hired people who can work in the way your organization functions or are adapting your organization to the people that you can hire.
So you mentioned doing it in a sustainable way and that their energy can be sustained over a long period of time. How does something like well-being affect employee performance and also the business's performance? And is this value immediately obvious? Where does it show up and when?
Yeah, so I like to think about the value of well-being as breaking into sort of two buckets. The first bucket is what happens when you keep people from feeling really bad. What we've seen in the research is that when well-being collapses, you see a sequence of failures in retention, productivity, work quality, and customer service. This is caused primarily by exhaustion and distraction, creating slower response times, reduced attention to detail, and stress and these negative emotions suppress cognition, intelligence, and emotional intelligence. And so organizations that allow their people to fall into the depths of poor well-being experience a whole host of problems. That's often easy to ignore because it's generally a preventative issue. So everyone sees it when it's fallen apart, but they have a much harder time sustaining the investments to keep it from falling apart in the first place. On the other
Okay.
hand, you have you have when
Sorry,
people.
I was going to do a follow-up. You keep going and I'll follow up at the end. Go for it.
Sorry. The other thing is when people are feeling good, you get increases in creativity, novel ideas, their ability to adapt and learn. And so that's really valuable when you're in a growth phase. For organizations that feel like they are in a cost efficiency phase or have very rigid ways of working, they may not see the value of employees having positive emotions because that's so much more focused on your ability to adapt and be creative.
Mm. Okay, so it's really contextual, like you said, not only just type of company, but the stage they're in and growth and even, like their product roadmap. What are they working on at the moment? So, Lane, since it's highly contextual, what does people first mean for Flashpoint?
Yeah, I think Ken hit it on the head. We're in the people business, but we're also in business. So there is a clear focus on making sure that people are in the right role with the right company, but also contributing to the overall company's goals. So the way that we try to look at it is making sure that there is a clear match. So we want to make sure that we're finding the right person for the right role on the right team to make sure it's not only a cultural add, but also fulfilling what the candidate's looking for. Because one of the worst feelings inside the recruiter world, which I'm not specifically have that experience, it is the worst feeling to find the right candidate with checks all the boxes and you think you clearly defined everything, and then you get 90 days in and they're unhappy. It's not a match for what they were thinking. So we have very specific requirements on how our team manage that. We have very clear 30, 60, 90 on our job descriptions. Our sourcers actually make sure that they're targeting the right profiles for the people that are going to add value. and not mislead them into what the expectations are going to be. And then we want to check into that. We want to make sure that we are fulfilling what we said we would based on what they were actually hired to do. And I think the other side of it is making sure that you're very clear about the performance expectations. I heard years ago that if you expect everybody to exceed expectations, your expectations are wrong. And that's always resonated with me from the performance side. And I think that's really critical when you're trying to find talent to then add to your organization. And so one of the things which maybe was contextually understood from, we have a very complex and unique organization. So we have threat intelligence analysts that come from three-letter agencies. We have people that are doing vulnerability analysis, people that are taking criminal personas and getting into the deep dark web to draw out hackers. So very unique and very cool. And then we have accountants and HR business partners. So we have the general norms of a lot of business stuff where we're specified too. So when you're pulling people from three-letter agencies to do this very critical work that's necessary for our business to thrive, they have certain expectations on who they're going to work with. They have expectations on the team norms, the culture they're going to be a part of. They don't want to have to be forced on 1 hour meeting a day to talk about how they're feeling. So we want to make sure that we're matching both what we need and what they need, because we don't want to get to a point where it's not a fit because it's our fault. So it's never something we want to get to the end there. And I know there was mention about well-being. One of the ways that I think about well-being outside of the additional context where people look at benefits and time off, ours is really, are you happy doing what you're doing? Do you feel valued? Do you feel recognized? Do you feel that you're not doing the effort for the sake of effort? It's an operational context, is process for the sake of process. That is not beneficial to team members. We want to make sure that they value what they're doing and they know that they're actually contributing to the overall company goals and not just siloed in their day-to-day check boxes.
Mm. Did you do you feel like you've always been really clear-eyed about what that match is? So you just described the type of person who does fit really well at Flashpoint. Do you feel like you've always been really clear-eyed about that, or did you go through a process to arrive at that? Where does that come from?
We went through many processes. So I would say it's been about 3 years now. We were realizing that we were in just a hiring spree. We got a new investment, so we were building up the organization. So we're in that high growth phase. And then we realized that we were filling seats and not actually adding to the overall value. So we redirected that from the get-go. We do an outcomes-based job description, which clearly sets expectations for every single role. These are your expectations at 30, 60, 90. These are your responsibilities. This is who you're going to interact with. And that set us on the course of better evaluations. So the evaluations were really honed in on our interview process. We rolled out new interview training for all hiring managers, unbiased interview training, making sure that we're removing any inherent biases that they're not aware of. And then we wanted to make sure that we are consistently evaluating at every stage objectively across all candidates. Not to say that wasn't done in the past, but we were in such high growth that it wasn't a focus. So we refocused on that. And I would say over the last 2 years since that point, we iterate every 30 or 60 days on our process to make sure that we are still honing in on adds to the team and not a fit.
Do you feel like or do you know if you shed a lot of employees in that process of, going from filling seats and realizing, oh, that's not really what we want to do? Did you find that there was a mismatch at that point with some people that you had hired, or were you able to sort of find your way quick enough?
We found our way. So we realized some mistakes. We didn't have to do any major restructuring or retitling of people. We
That's
just
great.
found a natural way to grow from it, because even though there were some mismatches with expectations, we just redirected the expectations and made sure the team members were on board with it, because it was our fault that we mismatched it. So we need to make sure that we continue to progress through.
Okay. So Flashpoint had their identity moment in the last few years. You work with a lot of different companies? How do you recommend a different company, another industry, another type of company, another cultural environment? How do you go about identifying what people first means for them? Where do you begin? Are you testing a hypothesis? Tell us how that works.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to really identify what is key to your business strategy and model. So for example, I did a lot of work with remote work and flexible work for a long time. And people would always say, you know what, you can't do it in manufacturing because people need to be there to be on the assembly line. And so they just did nothing. when we went and spoke to people who worked in manufacturing, what they said was, actually, I just need better shift change protocols. If I can just swap with somebody without having to go through 15 layers of ambiguity and uncertainty, I'd feel so much better and this would be great. And that was people first in manufacturing. And so I would talk to HR people and be like, oh, it's too bad we can't give them remote work options. Like, they don't want remote work options. They want shift changes. And so I think the first thing you really want to do is understand what is the business necessities of the way you operate, and what are the things that people really need to get through work-life conflict, personal conflicts, and see where there's opportunities to like meet in the middle. What can you offer that solves the problem people are having that's causing them to be exhausted versus simply saying, well, we are what we are and you can't do anything about it. I think the other piece is really a question about overwork and time, and like what is a reasonable amount of work to give people before things break down. In an ideal world, we would say, let's measure their well-being. If their well-being goes down, that's too much work. That's not an ROI conversation. That's an ethical conversation, as I said before. If you want to go into the ROI conversation, then you need to tie it to how does poor well-being harm the business or benefit the business? So can you show that when the teams that have well-being plummeting are not hitting their deadlines or their work quality is poor? We know that people who are stressed produce more errors. And so those are all things that you need to make sure that you're measuring to make an ROI argument that well-being impacts things. Likewise, it's really helpful to be able to show, the turnover costs has been one of the main places that people have focused on, but there's also the presenteeism costs. So to what extent are people showing up but giving 75% of their work? One study suggests that you basically lose about 3 months of productivity time to poor well-being through presenteeism. They show up and they do 3/4 of a day. And that is actually far more costly than absenteeism by about 10 times.
So you described tying something like well-being of your team with, like you just said, presenteeism or being stressed and therefore making mistakes. How are you getting a benchmark for well-being? Are you serving up a poll and saying like, how are you feeling? What's the number you're getting there to compare?
Yeah, so one of the best things is just to run a well-being survey to get a sense of what is going on and making sure you don't just measure the well-being, but you measure the things that cause well-being. So if you're connecting those two things, you can see, oh, the people who are saying they have poor well-being are also saying they have a manager problem, or they're also saying they have a time management problem. So you can focus in on what is going to make a difference. I think one of the biggest challenges HR people have is they sort of spaghetti at the wall well-being. Here's every possible thing I can do for you, and I haven't actually connected it to whether or not you have a absenteeism problem because you need emergency childcare, or you have an absenteeism problem because I need to give you permanent childcare. And so when you start slicing those things up via surveys, you start getting a focus on where to take action and what levers to tweak.
Do you recommend then adding it? You just described benefits, for example, like the childcare example, or specific benefits. Are you recommending adding them one at a time or simply surveying them individually?
So I think some things are kind of baseline. We know that they are challenges. So access to childcare is something to look at and say, if you can't support that, can you offer start and stop time flexibility so that people can work around the fact that they don't have the childcare access that they might want or need? I think one of the key things when you're testing something more like a internal program and is to have a control group. So you either want to see that the same group got better over time or that they're doing better than somebody who doesn't have access. I think another big mistake HR people do out of love is trying to get the benefit to everyone, and then they can't prove that the benefit made a difference because everything changed simultaneously. Whereas if you have a control group, you can really point to team A is better because of this, because that's the one thing that changed.
Lane, you were nodding your head. Is that something you've done, or was that just agreement?
I mean, this is general agreement. However, I would agree 100% with Ken that a normal HR practice is here's everything I can give you. It's more about treating the symptom instead of the disease. So, and we always are looking at trailing indicators in HR, like attrition calculator, turnover calculator, benefits, well-being packages, enrollments. So we're not looking at those leading indicators. And it's not always, very often not centered around your offerings. It's a lot of times around the systemic things inside your organization. And this even goes back to that people-centric. If people are doing work that they don't think is found valuable by the organization, they're not going to show up. They're not going to have absentee problems. They're going to show up, they're going to log in, they're going to check the box, and they're just going to go home along their merry way. So one of the things that I always recommend for HR leaders to expand the scope of what you think of well-being being and what the scope of your enjoyment can expand to. I said our company is very complex. There's a lot of crazy things that happen and it impacts people differently. An engineer focused on a roadmap or a product leader focused on what they're communicating to our clients have very different stress triggers or issues than we have somebody that is getting deep into the dark web. And it's the same thing with our benefits admin. How much are they feeling the impact of our offerings or have they have an impact on how many employee questions are there? So rather than treating the trailing effect of their well-being, are you engaged at work? Engagement is a symptom. We need to understand what's the underlying problem and how can we impact that from an HR perspective? And can we expand our view of what an HR leader or HR person can actually impact across the business?
Wooly, would you tell us some of the most important metrics you found most useful for you to track, and then which ones aren't useful? Maybe you've tried and ditched them.
Yeah. So I would say if you looked at my dashboard of all the different charts that we track for reporting across the organization, we have around 46, and that's a lot. And nobody wants to see all 46 of that. My team lead of talent doesn't like looking at 46 every Monday to give me a rundown about how things are going. So I would say it depends on the altitude in which you speak. So we said in the beginning, we're in the people business, but we're still in business. And if you're presenting to our board of directors, they don't want to see 46 slides. They care about the dollars and cents. Are we having savings? Are we finding a budget versus the actual salary? Are we having a clear use of our benefits that we're paying for? What's the ratio of that? What are we controlling? So I would say that there are a lot of metrics that don't matter. And I would say it depends on the situation. So, and I'll use an example for us. The most common in talent is time to hire, time to fill, average days open. And I would say about 2 years ago, I told my team I don't care about that. I don't care about that metric. Yes, we track it. Yes, we report on it, but that's not what's most important. We went through the hiring spree and now we're in the focused hiring. We're more deliberate with it. So what I care about is finding the right person for the right role that will add to the value of the organization and hitting our goals. So that average days open, ATO, ATTO, all of that is a trailing indicator of how long the role was open. That's about it. What I want to understand is do we have the right candidate? So we look at our 30, 60, 90 from both the employee perspective and then the hiring manager perspective. We want to know, did we tell you the right thing? And are we also making sure that they're fulfilling what they said they would fulfill? So we started looking at a vast amount of different metrics. One that was heavily impactful was vacancy savings. This was spoken to me randomly about a year ago from a finance expert and said, I really want to know how could we track this? And really what vacancy savings is the time from somebody leaving the role and the time we actually backfill that role. And so what that did is we were able to track that across any terminations of any type and see how long it took from the time they left and the time that we hired somebody on a daily basis. So with that information, while it is a trailing indicator in the past, we use that to actually forecast better financial expectations based on our attrition modeling. So our attrition modeling gave finance a broad understanding of where they should expect some changes, but they couldn't hone it in. But the vacancy savings expectations that we saw with that very soft, I don't care about how fast you fill it. I want you to find the right person. I'll defend you to anybody that says it's not fast enough. So we were able to give them that modeling and they were able to bake it into our financial projections for the year. And that was able to free up funds to then put towards vendor management or better engagement activities That way, we're not trying to hit a savings expectation, but this was just an expectation. We're going to get there based on our hiring practice and the history of how we actually operated.
Did you have to convince anybody that time to hire wasn't the right one? I mean, that finance person was like, he kind of, or she was like on the right track. When you go to the board or business leaders, are they like, wait, time to hire? That's what everybody does.
Yeah. So it was hard at first. However, the proof's in the pudding. So when you're in a large growth phase, that time matters because it impacts the product roadmap, engineering's roadmap, the deliverables for a go-to-market team, the support of your overall ARR growth expectations. So that was an easy, not going to get rid of this at this hiring spree. But once we really honed in on the expectations of where we were going, it was clear to show them, yes, these are the industry best practices. However, we're not in a 15% per headcount growth phase where we need to focus on this. What we need to focus in, and it was an easier pitch when you get to the board levels, we're going to find better savings by finding the right person and taking our time. When we got to the executive level, we said we would follow the timeline of the expectations of the role. If you needed to find a faster go-to-market leader and we had a pipeline of it, it's a shorter time to fill. So it wasn't something we had to report on because they knew we had a pipeline to build it. So we more had enough data that we could come with that at the right altitude and speak to it very clearly and put myself in front of it saying, I'm tracking this, I'm responsible for it.
So both of you have described a people first culture, excuse me, having to do with a good match to the role and a good match to the company. Now, a lot of organizations right now, because they're not doing a whole lot of hiring from without, they're moving within. Internal mobility is a big concern, not only for employers who want to retain people, but employees who don't want to jump ship, go somewhere else. They want to stay with their company where it feels good and safe, but they do want to move, they want to grow. So, is it enough to just match the person to the company and make sure that is good to make sure that way they can come in and move around? How do you do that when internal mobility is a priority? Can recommendations?
Yeah. So one piece of it is replicating that. How do this company function at how does this role function? So I would always joke with some of my colleagues when I worked with a lot of salespeople. They'd be like, "Oh, it's the end of quarter. Aren't you stressed?" I'm like, "No, because the way my job functions, it doesn't care about quarters. Like it is a continuous flow of work, and so my stressors and your stressors are very different." Likewise, people would be like, "What about emergencies?" I'm like, name a people science emergency. Like there aren't any. And so what my team needed to focus on was credibility and knowledge base and time to be able to stand in front of a crowd and deliver. And if they could not do public speaking, they couldn't be on the team. And so I think a large chunk of it is identifying really key roles and making sure the employee is good with that. Like I've definitely had people that I would say, like, you're brilliant in every other aspect except you panic at public speaking. And if you can't address that, this is not the job for you. Even though they really love the idea of it. And so I think you really want to be able to break jobs down to what are the most fundamental deliveries of value and make sure people either have it or are getting access to developing that skill in their current role or in their training processes. And so that also helps with well-being because, as Lane said earlier, it helps give meaning and growth to a job that might sometimes feel very repetitive or boring. But if it's opening doors, it becomes valuable. And so I think the other big thing is just being able to break stuff down into skills or competencies. Job descriptions are changing so fast now that if you try to career ladder it, you often get disappointed. But if you can say, the next level up needs to be able to do these kinds of things, you get a lot more flexibility and can still give people some guidance on how to grow into those roles.
Out of curiosity, when you would say, hey, you have to be able to do this one thing, the example you used was public speaking. Do you find folks have an appetite for that? Or is it, no, I'll just go a different way?
It depends on the person. Like some people will say, I want to do this and I really want to do this. And so if you can help me learn it, I will take that risk.
Yeah.
Others are not there and they need a really honest statement. or you end up with someone who's trying to do something they actually don't like.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that destroys well-being, is just like, I'm trying really, really hard. I once tried to be a salesperson. I hate prospecting. It makes me deeply anxious in a way that I could not get over. And I had to leave that job. Like, it was bad for my well-being and it was bad for the company because I couldn't do it. I'm really great at public speaking in other contexts, and that's just the way it was.
Ken, the shortest job I ever had was 2 days in college. I was a sales rep for the school, like arts paper. Done. Was not going to happen.
And I think that's the subtext of some of our conversation, is that like HR people keep trying to make everybody's well-being good. And sometimes the best way to do that is to tell someone you might need to leave. And so like some turnover, some transition isn't necessarily horrible.
Well, let's talk about then, Lane, you've brought up the 30, 60, 90 review. And if you could give us a recap of like what you're assessing at those points, because it's not just performance, it's also maybe what how Flashpoint's upholding its end of the deal. Would you tell us about those milestones?
Yeah, so actually that's the perfect. My first job was out of college, was also sales, and I did not last long. I hate cold calling. So the way that we approach the 30, 60, 90 is twofold. So we bifurcate that between the people experience side, like the true HR side of the business, and then the talent side. So the recruiting in every aspect following. So we have that soft, intimate, face-to-face new hire check-in within the 30, 60, 90. We also have continuous touch points from the recruiter with their new hire to make sure that we're fulfilling everything, keep them bought into exactly what they joined for, and making sure that there was alignment. We also test that on the hiring manager. So we want to know from the employee that was hired, are we fulfilling every aspect? Were we clear about your responsibilities? Were we clear about the performance expectations? And from the hiring manager, are they fulfilling it? It's not a performance review. Those don't happen until 6 months in. And we want to catch that in the first 90. And to Ken's point earlier, if you're not a fit for the role, it is detrimental to both the employee and the company. We've all seen an employee that has lasted far too long in a company that just doesn't fit for them. They're not happy. They don't enjoy the work. They're there just for their paycheck. But when they go to somewhere else, they blossom. They find that niche. So what we like to do is within those first 90 days, we want to make sure that we understand, were we wrong? Did we not fulfill the expectations that we told you this would be? Did we not accurately represent what you would be doing day to day, the culture of the team, the culture of the company? And then also, is there a way to redirect that? With the internal mobility side, I like to adopt the continuous improvement methodology, development. If you are not good at public speaking, do you want to be? If you want to be, great, we'll find opportunities for you to grow and develop your verbal, written, and presentation communication. If you don't want to do that, and it's a critical responsibility for this role, where can we help you pivot either your growth journey or your development to find another role that may be a fit for you? And then ultimately at the end of it, if it's still just not a fit, we'd rather catch that early because those candidates have likely already prospected potential employers. So more than one person is getting multiple offers all at the same time. It's a hard job hunt market, but at the end of it, they have competing offers coming in. So we'd rather make sure that we are clear in those first 90 days, whether it's a true fit and a true ad for both their longevity and the company's.
Do you ever find, and I guess what do you do in this case, where you have to go, wow, we really didn't give this person an indication of what this job would really be like? Or did your sort of identity moment in the last few years prevent that kind of thing?
It has prevented it now. In the beginning, where we were not clear in those job descriptions, it was very old school, very historic modeling of a job description. We wanted to make sure that we set ourselves out right for the right structure, the right clear indicator of how the company actually operates. We worked with marketing on the actual like boilerplate, but the rest of it all came between people ops and the hiring partners. So we make sure anytime we have a new role, even if we've recruited for it 10 times, we want to make sure we're meeting with that hiring manager. This is what you had last time. What were we wrong about? How can we better be clear with the candidate? And what is missing from here that they should know about? And it's a very honest conversation. So that's where talent acquisition shifts into talent partners. You have to have that relationship and that clarity in your spoken communication of saying, you were wrong. This is not a responsibility, or the actual expectations for the role were higher than this in the first 90 days. We need to define that. We need to clearly write this out because we don't want to be in the same situation again.
You mentioned earlier that your new job descriptions have very outcome-based or written with outcomes in mind. When you say that, do you mean are you including like what they'll be measured on? Like, are the KPIs on there? What's an outcome-based job description?
So outcome-based job description is less so built around the time you spent doing a role. We see this all the time, 10 years in HR, 10 years in a leadership position. Time does not equal value.
Mm.
So that's one of the things that we set out real fast is we're able to showcase your top performer inside your team was promoted 6 times in the past 5 years. They had zero experience coming in here. You have somebody that's been here for 10 years, was 10 years before that, and they haven't moved, and that's okay. We need those people. However, what are you looking for? So by showcasing that from a data perspective and personalizing it for them, it was very clear that they understood that in an outcomes-based job description, we want to know, have you done this? You have presented in front of a board of directors for a PE or VC-backed firm reporting on business intelligence. You have project manage a release of an internal tool with vendor management. So we want to know, what have you done? And so we match not only their resume, but also our entire interview process to that outcomes based. And it's never going to say must have a bachelor's degree because even though I did teach in school, it's not everything and it's not a clear indicator of what they must have to succeed for many of the roles. So it's very much based on what have you achieved in your past, and we want to know, how did you fail?
It sounds a lot like what many folks would call skills based. Is that what you would call, or would you differentiate in some way?
I would differentiate. It's like differentiating between soft skills and competencies. So
Mm.
it's just another term layered on top of it. And then we have an IO psychologist that can get into the deep gritty on it. So skills based is very much you have this skill. We want to know, what was the outcome of the skill that you applied?
I want to remind our audience that here in just a few minutes, we'll take questions for both Ken and Lane. So if you have any, and we have some really good ones already coming in, do put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, Ken. So you've transitioned to a people first culture. You're there, you've done it, you've solved all of your problems. Congratulations, well done, you. But how do you know if you've actually improved the workforce and its performance? What benchmarks do you recommend that HR teams use?
So I think what you really need to do is first ask the question of, like, what are the challenges that the business has been facing? So, for example, Lane was saying speed to hire isn't the issue for his organization. For others, they miss their deadlines because people just aren't in seats. And they're not necessarily, we need high skills, we need bodies. For them, they're going to use a time to hire metric because that's more meaningful for the way they are achieving their goals. From a well-being perspective, you might want to say, all right, we are seeing we're not meeting deadlines. You could just push people harder, or you could explore, why are they not achieving their goals? And so, all right, we see the well-being teams are closer to goals, and the lower the well-being, the more we see people missing their goals. And so what you want to make sure you're always doing is tying back your initiative to the outcome that you set out to change with it. I think the other problem that we see with a lot of well-being, at least from a business strategy, is the starting goal is for employees to feel better. And that's not actually your goal in a business. It is to make people feel better so that they can perform the roles. So you want to make sure that they are getting better performance ratings, that they're staying at the jobs that they're doing well at. You want to make sure that they are being seen as good collaborators and able to engage with the organization and show that that increases or decreases with your measure of well-being. And so for measures of well-being, surveys are the most straightforward, but you can also be looking at things like benefits usage, benefits costs. You can be looking at other things that you know are affected by well-being. So for example, more sick days taken. Are you finding that the teams that are not meeting their deadlines have really high sick day usage, really low well-being scores, and also really low manager scores. Maybe we should be talking to the manager about how they're taking care of their people. And so really the focus is you have to build a constellation to understand the actual issue you're trying to change. If well-being is your goal, you're likely to find that the organization cuts it at an inconvenient moment.
I like that you use the term constellation. I'll share a very quick anecdote. I have a friend who's been in their job for like 6 or 7 years. It's a big corporate company, and nobody likes the manager, but no one will say anything because they have a lot of power. And I kept asking her, like, well, like, is anyone asking you about the manager? And they were getting like one survey every quarter or something like that. And it was more or less like an NPS. Like it was very vague. It was like 1 point. And what I think they were trying to get at is, are you happy?
Right.
But like happy about
Well,
what? Yes, I'm happy to have a job. I'm not happy to work for this manager. Like they weren't gathering enough information. I'm sure they were looking at performance scores too. I'm sure that was there, but like there just didn't seem to be like they were collecting enough information and just going, well, everybody says they're doing okay. So
I think
I was surprised given the size of the company. I was like, I did not know they would be doing it like that.
the vocabulary word I've come to really hate is metrics,
Mm.
because what really we want to talk about are relationships. What is the relationship between delivery times and well-being scores? What is the relationship between customer satisfaction and employee well-being? Which one's waxing and waning? That is where the real value is. But people get hung up on what things should I track? And I always get frustrated because I'm stuck back at the asking the question of, well, what problem are you trying to solve? If you don't know that, then like I can give you 1,000 metrics. And no, I see one person asking the question of like, how do I know when I'm tracking too many? It's when you don't know why you're tracking them.
Well, let's go to some audience questions. That's one I was going to throw out. I can't find it now, but it was basically that. Like, how do you know when you've just got too much noise? Like, how do you know when you're tracking? Oh, here it is. What are signs for tracking too many metrics or the wrong ones? Ken, do you want to start, Lane, and then you can add on?
So I think too many metrics is when you have, as Lane talked about earlier, decks and decks of information that you're just throwing at people and saying, you figure out why this is valuable. If you are not walking in and saying, I saw this, therefore these things are going to happen to the business, it's not a useful metric. And so I think for HR to really fight for well-being, you need to be able to walk in and say, these things predict things that happen to the rest of the business. It affects whether or not we make money. It affects whether or not we hit deadlines. And if we see this number plummeting, then we can predict that these other things are going to follow in their stead. And vice versa, when I improve these things, the business outcomes get better. I think if you cannot tell that story, that metric can probably be cut in favor of something else.
Yeah, that's actually perfect. And if we don't hit all these questions, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I love conversations around data. I like to nerd out around it. So the way that I like to think about if I am tracking the right metric or which one's the wrong metric, it's if I forget it exists. That's a very clear indicator. We report every Monday to this group with these metrics. We report every quarter on these metrics to this group. If I scroll down in that list and there's a metric on there, I go, wait, when was that updated? Gone. It's not necessary because it didn't have a clear outcome. If it was not used effectively, there's two things you have to look at. Did we utilize it effectively in our presentation to the right audience? And the second one is, are they going to do anything about it? That's the bigger question with it. So if you think you have too many metrics that you're tracking, the answer is yes. But you need to start tracking what the correct metric is. And the way that I always try to to link it is, does it have a clear business outcome? Is there intentionality behind it? Is there clarity? Does it impact the employee? Does it impact the business? Does it impact the entire organization? If the answer is no for all of those things, you can put it into a bucket of look at later.
We have one more poll for our audience to take. If you guys could just quickly direct your attention there, but we're just going to keep rolling because these questions are really good. Ken, were you going to weigh in on that one?
I was going to say also the answer sometimes changes over time. So like right now I talk about intent to stay a lot less than I used to. So before COVID, there was much more of an issue of people leaving really quickly, and organizational leaders could hear that message and see dollar signs bleeding out of their organization. Now we're in an era where they're like, I have too many people, so they're going to leave? Great. And so I don't care about intent to leave, because if you're thinking 2 years from now, if you have a whole bunch of people who are planning on going, you're going to have a collapse and another, at least localized, great resignation. But it's not going to move anybody tomorrow when you say well-being is down and they're going to leave. Like, great, I need fewer of them right now. So I think it's important to keep a finger on the pulse of what leadership is solving for, because that's going to also tell you whether a metric is like ascendant or falling away from importance.
Okay, our next question is directed specifically for Lane. So this person writes, what questions does Flashpoint ask in the onboarding hiring leader survey? I don't remember if you mentioned that by name, but I get what they're going for. We use new hire surveys, but it could be good to survey hiring leaders about how things are going with their new hire from their seat.
Yes.
Thought?
Yes, that's fantastic. So we actually have different questions at each stage. They're very relatable. However, it's softer at the beginning stages and more clear in the second stages, because we do not want people thinking that we're measuring that they must be 100% performing to the highest level of expectations. So our first 30 days, I think I have it somewhere. There it is. Is the employee making satisfactory progress in their onboarding journey? The second question is, does the employee have a clear understanding of their onboarding journey and what is expected of them? And the third one is a very open answer. Are there any details that you would like to clearly respond to regarding their onboarding progress or the achievements they've had so far? So it's very broad. As we get to the 60-day stage, it's less around satisfactory progress. It's more of expected progress. And then because there's that one gap, and we have primarily US based, so we're not following a 180-day check-in period. We have a 90-day gap between their 90-day final check-in and when we get to their first 6-month performance review. So we want to make sure that we've asked and prepped the manager to understand what's going to be accurately rated for that employee 3 months after they finish that 90-day.
So well planned, Lane. And what a scoop, just reading it off. Okay, that was great. Okay, so the next question is also for you, Lane, so we'll stick there. This attendee writes, there it goes. I love the idea of an outcome-based job description. From a comp lens, how are you able to price the role competitively without education or an experience requirement? I know that's a benchmark for a lot of folks.
That is a benchmark for a lot of folks. Ooh, that's an interesting one. So when we test our compensation, because we have clear grades, clear role titles, assignments, and everything. When we set out for it, we did not have a direct correlation to previous education. We directed around where they were at in their journey. So we do it now on a professional level, so P1 through 5, based on the expectations of the role. So when we test our market, we go along with the philosophy we have around our pay structure and our grades, and we fit that with the description of what they're actually doing when we're testing it. So we are not delineating into, did they come from the public sector or did they come from the private sector? Do they have education from a educational institute, or do they have 10 years of experience doing the active role? We don't delineate on that. However, we do have a role here and there which does have a requirement for education. Like I said, my wife's a clinical psychologist. A doctorate is a requirement to do what she does. So sometimes there are requirements to that, and it doesn't always change the compensation level, especially when you're testing it with Mercer Comtrix or PAVE. It has an impact. However, it's not a direct correlation to the specific grade or the range at which you're hiring for.
Okay, your next question is this. How do we track whether managers are living out people first leadership behaviors? Both of you are nodding your head. Let's start with Ken, and then we'll come back to you, Lane.
So some of that is actual manager behavior surveys. So asking employees, like, are you having the kinds of experiences and with your manager that match with our values, that match with the way we've told them and told you that work should be conducted? And so that kind of starts with first being clear as to what you really think they should be doing, which I find that is often a very vague reality. So while surveys often get a bad rap, they can also force you to articulate what it is you're looking for in the first place, which is often a skipped step. Exit surveys and conversations are also places where you can see it's a bit late, but it allows you to guard against other issues. Likewise, onboarding. If, for example, are the employees saying, yes, the manager has adequately set me up for doing my job? Or are they still saying, I'm a bit confused? If you're thinking more in terms of sort of toxic negative behaviors, I think we run into what you were talking about, Emily, where people might be afraid. And that's where I think organizations need to leverage qualitative research and conversation to piece together what could be happening before digging in and doing the proper investigation. And so it depends on the sort of scale that you want to do that evaluation, talking about specific one or two managers or lots of them overall.
Lane?
Yeah, so actually we look at this from two perspectives. One is, of course, the new hire check-in. We also use a 360-degree feedback where the manager of the manager assigns anybody and everybody. It doesn't always have to be the direct report. Clear understanding, it's 10 simple questions. We run through it based on how well do you feel engaged? Are they the go-to person? Are they open to clarity and understanding? Do they approach you with care and candor? So that's all trailing indicators. The other side is we make sure from a leadership development perspective, we are showcasing that for the people that are in the middle. A lot of leadership expertise is looked at from the top, but the people that are doing the training, the people that are interacting with the managers need to be able to approach each other with curiosity and making sure anything that they're outlining with clarity and intentionality. Because if I am doing that with a new manager, they're going to feed off that, regardless of the development journey I take them through. If they see that from me and it makes them feel like they're being heard, they're going to exemplify that with their team member. So we utilize that in any interaction. We have a culture of curiosity, we have a culture of continuous improvement. However, we push that from that middle layer, making sure that they interact with their peers, their team members, their manager with that curiosity and being very clear and intentional with anything that they're actually communicating to them.
Okay, let's go to the next question. Ken, I think you're looking at these questions coming in. There must be one that you've picked out that you're just dying to answer. I can see you scrolling, my friend.
Well, I think across all of these questions, a lot of what people are looking for is what are the things that I can put into my world and say, I'm going to do this and I know I'm doing the right thing. And I think, sadly, the answer is there is no definitive list because everything comes down to what is the relationship that you think is playing out in your organization and how is well-being tying to the work that you're trying to do. And so you really need to take a step back. And I often describe it through what in my training we call line and box models, where you sort of start with the outcome that you want to have and you work your way backwards with, A causes B, causes C, causes D. Great, I can now envision that like people aren't hitting their timelines because they're distracted, because the boss is yelling at them, because the boss themselves has been yelled at by the senior leader, and that's a well-being problem. So how do I first show that that's happening? So where is that data captured? Where can I capture it? And then the next question you have to ask yourself is, how can I show the relationship between the two over time? If you're trying to solve a well-being problem for a single individual, it's really not a data question. If you're trying to understand, are we just giving unreasonable time expectations to people and we're just going to have huge turnover, then that's much easier to do from a data perspective. And so I can think of one company I spoke with where they did the math and said, when we offer 4 weeks of vacation, people sign on much faster than if we offer 2 weeks of vacation. And so the costs of not getting people in seats just exceeds what we spend in vacation. So just give them more vacation. And so they were able to show that argument. But the value of vacation came from the problem they were trying to solve. And so I think to all of these things, you really need to start with where is the business either breaking or benefiting from people feeling not miserable, and work your way backwards to show how is that the case. And you don't have to do it perfectly. You just need to have a good enough educated guess that somebody would say, yeah, I see the pattern there. Like, what can we do to fix it within the bounds of the people first culture that we discussed at the beginning?
It's like approaching a data analyst and saying, could you give me some insights?
Yeah, exactly. It's a meaningless question, and it has such great intention, but like it all starts with, at least if you're talking about it from an ROI perspective, what is the return on investment you're looking for?
You know, and I wonder if, when someone asks that question, which my husband works in cybersecurity, that is asked of him quite a bit. As someone approaches him, was like, could you deliver insights for us? And he was like, I would love to. What it seems is a lot of times people asking for that don't know what there is to find. Like, what could I ask this person for? How do you get there? How do you help someone know what they could know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think I would go back to what I was saying earlier about how does well-being collapse performance? And so it causes people to not be able to interact with others effectively. It causes withdrawal behavior, it causes aggression, and just bad relationship skills. So what you could then say is, okay, does that affect customer success and customer service? Do I have anything out there that measures customer service? Great, I have a customer service stat over here. Can I break that up by people and get a well-being score? Great. Now can I see whether well-being predicts customer service? And so what you really want to do is talk to people, get that qualitative information that I know everybody in this audience probably has from any number of stories they've been forced to listen to, and look for the pattern in, if people do this, then this bad thing happens. How do I show that people are doing that? And how do I show that bad thing is occurring, either through, ideally through existing business metrics, and then show that relationship. And so start with just basic correlation. Excel can do that, and understand what that is. And then platforms like HiBob allow you to create much more complex dashboards and show relationships and charts over time. But really just start with that simple, if people are feeling bad, do we not hit our time? If people are feeling bad, do we have lower customer success scores? Like, go simple to start and then explore theory.
Lane, is there anything you would add to what Ken said? He wrapped it up so well, but I know there's something else in your brain.
You know what? As he was talking, I was like, yes, yeah, I wanted to shout it out. And there was one that popped up, like, what are we not tracking, or what could we be tracking? Are we not there yet? And the trailing impacts is such a big one. And every organization, HR is in the middle. We are the operational like glue that holds organizations together. We have more data than we can do anything with, but so does product and customer success and operations and biz ops and rev ops. Finding a way to correlate those together to understand the trailing impacts from people, because the equation for successful business is A plus B equals C. The only difference in there is people on the good and the bad. So if we can find a way to capture all this disjointed data, put it together into more predictive analytics model, utilizing all these tools that we've never had to use before, we can really showcase the value of HR being in the middle of it and understand trailing impacts of every decision we make.
Okay, well, I love talking to you both. It's always enjoyable. We're at the top of the hour, so we're out of time, but I'm going to pass it back to Steve at From Day One. He does have some final announcements to close us out. So back to you.
This has been fascinating. Thank you, Emily, for leading the conversation, and to Ken and to Lane, not only for their data expertise, but also their really thoughtful approaches to how to use metrics and finding the telling relationships between them. This has been really informative. Now, before you all sign off, I'm going to put the link again in the chat space to some complimentary VIP tickets for our virtual conference. It's coming up on July 16th, and it's about navigating the new landscape of employee benefit solutions. So on behalf of all my colleagues at From Day One, thanks for participating and stay cool. Bye for now.